Hello, everyone. Welcome to Mad Out Media. I'm Grim Vera, and as always, I have my friend Tony Crow with me. How's it going, Tony?
Real good, thanks.
Awesome. So today we've got a bit of an interesting episode. It's going to be handling fertility and things that Tony and I have kind of researched a bit and looked into to maybe lend itself to an answer towards the declining birth rates amongst the white population.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting aspects to fertility beyond beyond that from the physical to the mental to the spiritual, and yeah, so I think it'll be good to kind of to see where we're at and see what we can draw upon from our studies on this.
Yeah, and I a good place to start, especially since it's something kind of everybody knows already, so we can kind of just get it out of the way, and that's exercise and how it pertains to fertility. And everybody seems to think that they have to go out and spend a lot of money on a gym membership or get a personal trainer, and that's not necessarily the case. I mean, you can look at those as kind of luxuries. I mean, Tony, I don't know if you have something to say about that, but I mean, that's how I see it.
Oh yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that because I did have a gym membership in the past, but then I started looking for options around my community that I could kind of use to just work out in different ways. And so I'm kind of interested to see what what ideas you have, and and I can also share about mine. But what I did is I canceled my gym membership, not really out of expense, but just like I just wanted to try something different because there's lots of things I can pick up and lift. There's lots of things I can go do, especially having lived in the mountains of Colorado and Utah. I can get out and go up and down the hills, up and down the mountains, and I can lift anything I want. There's plenty of rocks and there's plenty of things. So there's plenty of opportunities even outside the gym, and my progress has been steady. So I'm happy with it.
Yeah. Speaking of lifting, um, that's one thing I end up having to do a lot because I don't even live close to a gym, so I couldn't get a membership if I wanted to. Realistically, I mean, the closest gym is
Mhm.
something like half an hour away. And luckily, this past spring, when I was in a portion of my yard that's gotten all overgrown and whatnot, I'm trying to get rid of the weeds and let the trees and whatnot flourish over there. But I found an old tractor tire, and I discovered that tractor tires actually make great, uh, workout devices, especially when it comes to strength. For instance, you can just like middle of it and do a deadlift with it, with the added bonus of, because of the odd way you have to lift it up, can improve your grip strength as well. And then there's also the farmer walk, where you step into the tire, you do a deadlift with it, and then you walk the tire a ways, and then you put it down, rinse, repeat. Or you can just flip the thing over and over again, and it's a really good workout. And the best part is I didn't have to spend a penny on it, and I'm getting probably a better workout than I would going down to Planet Fitness and using one of their machines.
Oh, dude, that sounds really great. It's not something I've tried myself, but I've had some pals in rural Canada, and now you're mentioning it about using the tires, and that's exactly how my friend in Canada described it as well. So it's really cool that you're trying out these things, and yeah, that seems like a great one. I would definitely do it if I had one.
Yeah, apparently you can get them pretty cheap. I was lucky and found one um, on the property already, but I guess tire places, they're a pain in the ass to recycle. They're expensive to, and so you can typically go and get old tractor tires for like really cheap.
The funny thing is being a city dweller myself. I have gone, I've seen these different gyms around town, and they have these tractor tires in the city at these type of like CrossFit gyms and stuff like that. It's really funny. It's like, you people could just move back out into the country and throw tires around.
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be tires. I mean, like you said, you've found pretty good rocks that I would wager have that kind of same obtuse, awkward shape. So you have to really focus on grip strength as well. But I mean, people could
Yeah.
go to like a park and exercise. Use the monkey bars there for chin ups, or and you can do like push ups and squats, sit ups anywhere. So yeah, if you want to kind of increase your lead there a bit, um, the exercise is definitely a good way to go, and money really isn't an excuse with it.
Oh, absolutely, dude. Just to add to this, I have also filled up like 7-gallon water jugs and just stuck it on my shoulder and done some lunges with that. Or I could just find an open field somewhere and try to do lunges across it or do sprints across it. And it's been really good. So I've really enjoyed it. It's actually a lot of fun. You can get out there and get some sun while you're doing it, if there's sun in the in your season. Over here, the sun's kind of shutting down.
Yeah, it is here too, but I might try to go out and do some lunges when there's like a foot of snow on top of 2 inches of ice here in a couple months.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, would you like to maybe segue from there into some ideas that we have about nutrition and fertility?
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, obviously, you can exercise all you want, but if you don't have the nutrition to go with it, you're gonna get nowhere pretty fast. I did a lot of research on nutrition, and after filtering through, all the vegan BS and all the you know shit lib idiot diets and whatnot. Uh, Two big things that I found uh, were one, a book from I think the early 50s, and I found this through volkish.org. If anybody's interested in going and looking at that site, but anyway, the book. No, sorry, I didn't want to have you listen to my cough there. The book talks about nutrition from a racial standpoint, and when I turn it over to you here in a second, Tony, I'll take a moment and look up the title of it. But it focuses on nutrition from a racial standpoint and looking at different diets from different areas in Europe. And the synopsis that I found on volkish.org points out that with northern Germanic people, like the Scandinavians and northern Germans and Celts and the like, our diets should focus more on uh, really fatty fish and sea bounty foods, as well as wild root vegetables. Whereas Mediterranean people have more proclivity to uh, the kind of fruits and vegetables and animals down there. But I mean, it seems like an obvious thing. But the point was to narrow your nutrition down to your ancestral demographics, and that will have an immediate effect on your health. And I tried it about as much as I can with my resources here, and I've definitely been feeling better overall. I mean, I was able to fight my last cold a bit quicker and everything. But yeah, that's a book that I found regarding the issue. Um, I don't know what you found regarding that, Tony, but yeah, what'd you find?
Well, I did read that article, but maybe if there was a book associated, I can't remember, but maybe you can add a link to the article or the book in the show notes. But yeah, I read that, and I think it's interesting. I haven't really applied it myself. Maybe if there's people in the audience who have tried this, they could add a comment or send us an email about how that's been working for them, and whether they felt good about it or not. It'd be interesting to hear the audience experience. But yes, I read that article on the Volkish site, and also there's another thing that I wanted to share, which I was I was listening to this woman who has a channel on YouTube called Political Philosophy, and in that she was discussing the kind of political nature of food. That whatever you're buying is a vote in a way, and that's kind of like the libertarian idea of voting with your dollars, but it is true. But what she was talking about is trying to figure out. She was discussing authors about trying to figure out where does our food come from and who is behind it, who's making it, who's growing it, who's tending to this stuff, and what do we know about them. And then also there was this idea of the cuisine, which I've heard the word before, but I didn't really know what it meant. But she was discussing cuisine in that there are these ingredients, meat and vegetables and other ingredients and spices that are local to your area or your region, and that by combining those together, that becomes part of your cuisine. That's what defines it, and that also defines a culture. Like you can imagine. Certain Europeans still have this very much intact, but here in the U.S., our cuisine, that like the Germans commented when they visited here, was like, "What's up with all this spinach? What's up with you Americans and this sloppy spinach that you're feeding us? What are you trying to kill us?" But anyway, yeah, this is something that's of interest to mine. So hopefully, people from the audience can also kind of chime in and give us their ideas, because I think we should follow up on this more and more.
Definitely. And I found the book, by the way, real quick. It's Folk Medicine, a Vermont Doctor's Guide to Good Health. And the author is D.C. Jarvis, MD. So if anybody wants to find that book and pick it up, uh, go go ahead. There's the name and the author and everything. And
Yeah, we could try to put it in the notes so it's a little easier.
yeah, we'll also go ahead and link it when this podcast goes live on mad.media.com. But Blake Hood did a fantastic synopsis of it, and if you don't know who that is, he's one of the guys that runs Volkish.org. But anyway, as I was saying regarding nutrition, now that I got that book plug aside, in terms of like the finer semantics, like vitamins and minerals, there were technically three, that stood out. There was zinc, and then folic acid and folate. And because folic acid and folate have kind of an interesting relationship, I'll go ahead and cover zinc there for first. And it's one of those things that I never really thought about, like zinc deficiency, because you hear all kinds of things about like iron and citric acid and B12 and this and that, but zinc has always kind of flown under the radar. And for what I found, I mean, it's a pretty important mineral, especially if you're interested in fertility and having going out and having lots of little white babies. Um, but yeah, I mean, it helps boost things like healthy testosterone levels, healthy collagen synthesis in your skin. Um, this is something guys should be concerned about. It prevents prostate problems. It'll stave off prostate cancer, which you know we should be immensely interested in. Um, it can help improve your cognitive functioning. It helps with taste and smell. It helps stave off colds. It can help manage weight problems. It'll help with your weight loss. For men, it assists in spermatogenesis and the development of your sex organs. It also helps sedate your sperm, which keeps them from expending too much energy before they need it. That burst to the finish line there. It keeps the DNA within your sperm from breaking down prematurely, and it's like the essential part of the enzymes that let your sperm get into an egg if you're not wrapping it there. Um, and then for women, it helps in all of their reproductive phases, including parturition and lactation. So it's like a powerhouse of a mineral, and I honestly I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of white people have severe deficiencies in it, especially with the growing number of bald men, because it turns out it helps reinforce hair follicles and maintain strong, thick hair. But yeah, I see a lot of fat, bald white guys with glasses, and I'm guessing it's probably due to zinc deficiencies.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you found out so many of these benefits from zinc. I was not aware of those, but something that kind of got me interested in it was I was sick, and one of my customers, a doctor, when I was living in Florida, came and took a look at me, and he's like, "What about zinc?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, if you're sick, he's like, start taking some zinc, dude. Eat some zinc, and what it will do is it will cut the time of your cold in half. And I was like, well, I don't really believe it, but I'll try it. And lo and behold, I had usually been sick for longer periods of time, and it went away very quickly. And from there, I started taking it, and actually, since I've been taking zinc and vitamin C and some B vitamins, I have not actually been sick, except for one kind of fluke case of food poisoning about a month ago. I have not been sick in several years, and some people, like, they can't imagine what it's like not to have like a couple different colds per year. But it's actually really great. Did you expand on what you wanted to say about the folate? I wasn't sure if you made it through your research on that.
Uh, I found a bit, um, but I mean, one last note here about the zinc. I was just thinking about this while you were talking. It's if uh, if you want to go out there and become like an Ubermensch, zinc is it. It is the Ubermensch mineral by looking at what it provides
Hmm.
and what it prevents. Whoa, made my note super small there.
Whoops. Well, another thing I wanted to add, and this is just kind of just an observation people have made, is that that certain things that we eat uh, kind of accent and boost different organs that they look like. So if it's red, it kind of helps your red meat. If it's white, like zinc, it'll help like the white parts of your body. Like the eyes and sperm. And I don't know if this is I don't know if it's proven, but many people have this belief, and I just wanted to mention it that it kind of coincides with what you're saying about the reproductive health.
Yeah, it definitely seems like it because as you were saying that, I was looking at the boons of having good zinc levels, and it does help with your vision too, and it helps mitigate bone loss. So I mean, it's kind of fallen right into what you were just
Mhm.
saying with meats and the color and whatever it's supposed to reinforce and the like.
Yeah. And just to kind of go back to the B vitamins, there's actually what people have discovered in this discipline called the name will come to me, but anyway, they discovered that many people are naturally deficient in these B vitamins. That they're very rare in nutrition. They're very rare in the environment, and some people actually have a deficiency in some of the B vitamins, and that's one of the leading causes of their mental illness. That some of these people were they were some of the early psychiatrists before there was all these harmful pharmaceutical drugs, but some of the early psychiatrists were using large doses of B vitamins to treat their mentally ill patients, and that they were getting very good results from that. So I'll look up the name for that discipline, but I believe that it's a very important thing. Those 5-hour energy drinks; those things are all B vitamins, and it's something that we get from meat as well.
Yeah, with those 5-hour energy shots. My friend's dad, many years back, when these were first becoming a big thing, he he decided to down one of them, or one or two of them, or something like that, and then whatever plans he had that would have kept him busy didn't happen, and he had nothing to do, and he just sat on the couch and he was just jittery all day. So if you have a surplus of B vitamins, if you have a surplus of B vitamins, make sure you have an outlet for it. Otherwise, you'll be fidgety and irritable trying to think of something to do. But yeah, in terms of B vitamins, that's actually what folic acid slash folate is. It's they're both a form of vitamin B9, and the difference between the two of them is folate is what naturally occurs in, like, spinach and other leafy greens, Brussels sprouts, asparagus, avocados even. And folic acid is the synthetic form of that. And people might think, well, if they're both B9, who cares, whatever. But this is something that's kind of a testament to why you should choose, the naturally occurring things over the synthetic substitute. Because folic acid doesn't process in the digestive tract the way folate does. So it has to go to the liver first. And therefore, it'll just kind of sit in your bloodstream. And something about the way it's constructed can actually hide vitamin B12 deficiencies, which causes problems on its own. But folate, the naturally occurring, is processed in the digestive tract. It's a critical vitamin for cell growth and the formation of DNA in new cells. Other benefits with it include the support for normal fetal development. It increases the viability of your sperm. It gives you better heart health. It reduces your chances of stroke. It helps with cholesterol regulation. It reinforces, neurological health and stability. And as a result of that, it can help counter things like perinatal depression, which is a big deal because
Mm.
when a woman is pregnant, if she gets that form of depression, she can't take antidepressants or anything. She can't take all these quick fixes that are available to anybody else because it'll negatively impact her
Mhm.
baby. So folate is super important for pregnant women, not only for their unborn child, but for their mental health as well. Um, but other things include, like, it'll activate genes that help reduce chances of colon cancer too, and it reduces the risk of age-related macular degeneration, or to sum up, loss of vision. You'll have blank spaces in either the center of your view or your peripheral. So it helps reduce the risk of that. And if you don't get enough of it, obviously it'll increase your risk of heart disease and stroke. It can cause birth defects in newborn babies, such as neural tube defects. It increases cancer risk, and I mean, so it's a crazy important vitamin. Um, but
Hmm.
to contrast that with folic acid, like I said, it doesn't get converted uh, into the active form of B9 in the digestive tract. Instead, what happens is it moves to the liver to be converted. And then, as I mentioned, this unmetabolized folic acid sits in people's bloodstreams, which can result in a higher risk for cancer, and it'll mask B12 deficiencies, which can lead to dementia and impaired nerve function.
I think it's great that you mentioned that. So, do they have folate in a supplement form, or is it really only available from living foods?
Good sir, I am glad you asked. That was actually next on my little list here. Uh, Obviously, it's best to get it from the naturally occurring sources of it. Asparagus, avocados, Brussels sprouts, spinach, lettuce, etc. And it can be found in supplemental form, but I'm guessing it's a matter of cost because even big swinger brands like One a Day will put folic acid instead of folate in their multivitamins. So it's better to just get it from your vegetables there rather than trying to rely on a supplement because a lot of these companies they'll list it as B9 and then maybe in parentheses they'll put folic acid, and that's what if you want to find it in supplemental form, always look for that. If it doesn't say folate, find something else because folic acid will wreck your shit.
That's really good to know. And kind of while we're talking about this, I wanted to mention that it's something we discussed that I didn't want to just discuss fertility in the sense of like reproductive health. I wanted to talk about this as like an overall fertility of our people, sort of like your mental, physical, and spiritual fertility. How fertile are you in all these different dimensions? And I think that from what you're saying and what I've discovered that these sorts of basic basic nutrition is really important for our overall health, not just fertility, but that is something that it does help.
Absolutely. I discovered with these minerals and vitamins here, especially these two, zinc and folate. They're important not only for sperm and egg viability, but it's also good for your mental health, which goes directly towards your spiritual health because you can have an absolute existential crisis and conflict of spirituality and everything if you allow yourself to slip into depression. So the matters of physical fertility and physical health play directly into the other two.
Yeah, and just wanted to share just a personal anecdote that I have spoken with some people, and they said that they were suffering in their mind, or they were feeling depressed, and so I suggested, why don't you go get some vitamin C and zinc, and also B3, because I didn't know much about folate yet. And what they said was that they had, this feeling of euphoria because they must have been so deficient as to be kind of possibly suffering from scurvy in a way, and that. That label which is on all the foods, they call that the RDA. I'm sure you've seen it, right?
Yeah, I've seen that.
you know how they list out that, oh, this has, 10% of this mineral or 100% of this. Well, I have listened to some people say, and I believe it, that they're saying that those values on there are only enough to keep you alive and not totally sick. That the actual amounts that you need of some of these vitamins and minerals is 10x to 100x of what is listed on those labels. So it's something that I'd like to consider. It's something that I would ask everyone to consider is, do you believe that the government has an interest in you maintaining your health? And if so, what would be their motivation? So I don't really believe it. And what I've discovered is that there are people taking these things in much larger doses and receiving larger benefits. And also, the things that we've been mentioning are cheap. They're all super cheap supplements, so it's really easy to get them for between $3 and $10 per bottle. And then the only thing that I wanted to add to your list there was iodine, which is something perhaps coastal people get more than the inland, but it is important for the higher intellect, for the higher functions of the mind, and also reproductive health. So they have found this kind of embedded into the tissues of the body. The one that people know most is probably like the thyroid, the one that's up in your head and neck. And the other would be that it's important for the breast, ovaries, and testicles. That this is that iodine is critical for their function and kind of a rare mineral. And so it does help if we can get a few drops of that per day or per week at least.
That's that's why it's important to iodize sea salt. Like, I've seen people question like, why, what is this? Or,
Hmm.
isn't iodine that stuff they wipe on your skin before they give you a shot? Um, and it's like, no, it's a
Hmm.
mineral and you need it. That's why it ges added to sea
Hmm.
salt, because we salt the hell out of everything already. Why not add an extra little benefit to doing so there? Quick.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
there's people trying to remove that. Yeah, there's people trying to remove that out of the salt, but that is a mistake. When they added that in to the food supply, when they add iodized salt into the food supply in America, they were recording jumps in IQ from 5 to 10 points at that time. And I'll try to find that research and link it in the show notes.
Yeah, and I do got a question for you, because you said something a little bit ago that was kind of, I thought it was kind of interesting. But real quick, what you mentioned about people that take way over the prescribed or recommended dose for these supplements. This last winter, and this was a couple months before you and I got to talking and reformatting Madot and everything into something worthwhile. um, I had like crazy, crazy depression from D3 deficiency, because there's
Mhm.
maybe 6 hours worth of sun out here in the winter, and even then it's too cold to go outside most of the time. So I had really bad vitamin D deficiency, and we started getting the supplements, the tiny little pills that are like 2,000 IU's, I think, of vitamin D per. And I was taking those, and I wasn't feeling like any less shitty. And I went and talked to the mother of my friend who runs the mini mart. She kind of takes over for him when he has to go down to the other end of the state. And she's a nurse at the hospital nearby, and she goes, "No, you should be taking like 4 or 5 of those. You can take that much safely, and you'll see much better results if you take 4 to 5 times what it says." And I started doing so, and as soon as my body started metabolizing it enough, I did start feeling better. It helped get through that this last winter. Um, But
Hmm.
what you were saying before, Tony, with fertility, you mentioned like physical and mental, but what really caught my interest was when you said spiritual fertility. So, uh, what were you alluding to? What did you have in store regarding that?
Oh man, well, I mean that is and has been an important part of human life for all of us. But my focus was mostly on the European roots in the fertility rituals, fertility rites, and the seasonal changes and their connection with the fertility of both the people and the soil and things like that. So yeah, if you want, I could just jump into some things that I discovered on that.
Well, you know how I just eat this kind of thing up. I mean, people would probably note that I'm normally the one that gets into the roots, at least a little bit of talking about the spiritual side of things on our show. So, I mean, I'm really curious to see what you've got.
Yeah, yeah, it is a little flip on the roles, but yeah, let me take a crack at this and see see if this resonates with people. One of the first things that I came across was like the May and April. Or April and May, if you want to go in that order, fertility festivals, and that there are these kind of that it's actually a pan-European practice to celebrate the fertility of the soil. And you probably will have seen many different names for this, but some would be like May Day or Beltane. And if you're listening to us and you have celebrated these and you've seen this firsthand, let me know. I have not really witnessed this myself. I'm just kind of going on what I can glean from different sources. Uh, and as far as the more ancient mainstream history, we have Floralia, the Roman festival for the god Flora, and it's kind of interesting, the costumes that you could see, especially for women. There might be something to compare a costume for men, but a lot of costumes for women that as Europeans we like to really celebrate our women with these festivals and have them kind of parade around in these really fancy costumes for these festivals. I certainly enjoyed seeing photos, and I might have seen certain versions of this in our society, but not like this. And these are late spring holidays. And we can expect to see maypoles in certain regions. It sort of depends on whether that has been part of their culture or not, whether we see a maypole, and they might have variations in different areas, but that's one that some people have mentioned. And then as for Christians, they have the Easter, and I think this might have been one where they wanted to kind of bring this practice into Christianity, but Easter is possibly named after Iostra or Ostara, the god or goddess. And if you're in the audience and you know better than me, there's this idea of the spring god and goddess, or the lord of the lord and a mistress of the spring. So these are kind of important themes and things to think about. They celebrated children in this way. It's not something we see too much nowadays, people celebrating their children, but it's something that I really like, and that people more in the past, and perhaps even some places in Europe, they may still do this. of taking a boy and the girl from the community and making them into the Lord and Mistress of the Spring, which would be really fantastic. But anyway, the Christians have a different idea on this, and what they're celebrating for Easter is the resurrection of Jesus. And maybe the resurrection there has kind of a comparison to a type of growth. It's kind of a stretch, but there is that. And I wanted to mention a source for more on this vein, which is an article in a video by the title "Bring in the May Spring Fertility Festivals" by Carolyn Emerick, a friend of the show. And this is featured in Mythic Dawn #1, and so I'll include links to those things. So if people want to find more, or if they want to find her media on this, is there anything you wanted to add to that? The April and May fertility festivals. Have you ever seen these?
I've seen a bit about them, but as far as and I'll boil this down to what I like to call quote unquote normie understanding of these things. Is I've seen May Day in particular often related by traditional conservatives as a communist festival, and trying to link it to Marxism, which, I mean, if you get in and actually research it, it's completely absurd. But that's for another show there. And then with Beltane, I had kind of an interesting, although I could have done without, experience regarding how some Wiccans chose to celebrate Beltane in the area that I grew up in, and they took it from this beautiful, healthy festival of spring and fertility, and degenerated it into just like a big old open sex orgy. Like, oh, it's the festival of being able to enjoy open sex with anybody. And one, that left a bad taste in my mouth. Not literal, like I didn't attend at all, but it left bad sentiments about it, and it was one of the big things that kind of tainted my view towards Wiccans a bit. So, I mean, if you're a Wiccan and listening to this, I'm sorry. It's nothing against you personally. It's my personal experiences that I had to deal with Wicca that kind of skewed me against it, and I'm happy to learn corrections. But yeah, regarding those two festivals, that's kind of what I've seen. On the one hand, traditional conservatives pointing at these ancient, awesome festivals and saying it's communism, and then Wiccans, on the other hand, kind of turning them into weird sex parties. But going off of that, because I don't want to reminisce about that too much. Yeah, Easter. And again, I'm not going to go too terribly into the weeds. Carolyn Emerick has done a fantastic job on covering this, so I'd urge anybody to go read it and listen to what she has up regarding the matter. But Easter, from what I've been able to tell, has been more or less kind of used the same way Christmas was, to kind of dismiss old pagan customs and integrate them into Christian customs to kind of manipulate pagans through the generations into adopting Christianity. So, I mean, that's what I have to say about that. I'm sure you have more on the matter, Tony.
Oh yeah, absolutely, man. And I think it's important what you were saying is that you were kind of turned away by some of the practices in this, and that's part of it. That actually is a part of the legitimate practice of these fertility festivals. Even if you feel repulsed by parts of it, that's a component. And I would say it's probably more inspired by foreigners, but I'll get into that there. But I just wanted to make a note, kind of about the energy of spring, the change of the season that uh, we see that our section of the earth starts to receive more sun, and it's bursting with life at that particular time, and it's a part where everyone starts coming out of the house again. I'm particularly a person who likes to be out all winter, but a lot of people just stay in, and people start drawing a lot of flowers and trees, and they adorn themselves with these plants. And this is, it's, you don't have to tell anyone to do it. You don't have to remind anyone to do it. They just do if they're European. And I don't know. I don't know if non-whites engage in this type of thing. I haven't seen it. But maybe they have their own ideas on this. But particularly for Europeans, adorning themselves with these flowers, both male and females do this, weave them into their hair or into their beard. And this is a very natural thing that people like to celebrate these seasons. But I personally would like to see it more formalized into the festivals again. I would really enjoy it. I'm not a person who has a faith, but I would like to still participate in the culture, and I would like to see these celebrations of life and the change of seasons. For me, it would be really special and great to see it. But yeah, the colors start to come back, and it breaks up the monotony of the white snow. Sometimes I get tired of it. I'd really like to see a lot of lush foliage around, and I like to see all that sort of stuff. So, is there anything you wanted to add to the springtime? Is there anything that you noticed that you really enjoy about it?
Well, first, I'd like to make clear that what repulsed me was the just degeneration of it purely into just a big old sex party with really no spiritual side to it. And I know that there were some cultures around the world, not particularly just in Europe, that had these kind of things. But I know that from my own research, there was a lot of focus on good, solid family units, and being faithful to the woman who bears your children. So I know it's one of those subjects that's kind of really muddy. Like, there's evidence that points in one direction, there's evidence that points in the other. But looking at how many other animals behave, sans bonobos, because they like to stick it in everything. There's a habit of males to be fiercely protective of their females, and I mean, you'll have like pride to lion where they'll have more than one, but there's also other species that do engage in something a little more monogamous. So I mean, it largely probably just depends on the part of the world the culture is from. But yeah, that's that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and you know what? The history of these things is kind of difficult it's difficult to find the truth. Some people totally believe in the history, and I'm sort of one of the people where I kind of look to it for guidance, but I don't really believe that it's all factual. I don't believe it's all true. So we might find out in the future that things are less dignified or more dignified about people in the past. And I think it's important to look at it, but we don't have to do exactly the same as the way people did in the past. We can come up with something that is better. And one of the ways that I kind of gauge what is the most healthy is what is going to support the child and the woman inside the family institution. So what is going to provide for the health and attention and affection for the child, and kind of being a part of an open sexual community, I don't believe that is going to provide the safety and nurturing for the child. So I tend to stay away from those. But if you're a person in the audience who is engaged in like a polygamous community or a polyandrous, correct me if I get the terms wrong. If the children are brought up in a healthy way, let me know. I don't believe that it is that way, but I am open to new evidence. But I would like to kind of go into this subject of a thing called fertility cults. And I've kind of heard this mentioned over time, and it's kind of mentioned in different ways. It kind of has different meanings depending on who's talking about it. So I wanted to disambiguate the different types of fertility cults. And one of the first kinds is the Babylonian fertility cult, where in the context of the Babylonian fertility cult in their culture, all women were expected at some time to become a prostitute, that they were shared and mingled, that all women in their culture were expected to do that, and that's according to the mainstream history that's like that. And there were also women at temples, for any sum, would have sex with someone, and there was a ritual associated where you had to go in, you walked in, and you would speak something to the woman, and you'd present her some money, and later outside the temple, then she would come to you, and so it was ritualized. But this is in the more modern time. We have seen that from the Chosenites that they transferred this into their religion, and into the Sabbateans and the Frankists. And the Sabbateans were a messianic cult. So were the Frankists. The Frankists were an extension of the Sabbateans, and that they were associated with what people loosely call Satanism and stuff like that. It's you basically take the rules of like the Abrahamic religion and turn it to its opposites. So having like a family and stuff like that is flipped upside down, and then you're not supposed to have a family, or being faithful is turned upside down and turned into becoming promiscuous. And that was something that was common to the Donme in the time of the Armenian genocide. That the Donme, a sect of the Chosenites, they were known as the wife swappers to the Mohammedans. And at this time, from what I've seen, I don't see any reason to expect that they have ceased on this barbarism. And clearly, this type of fertility cult, we don't want to emulate. We do not want to continue in that tradition. So, is there something you wanted to add to that?
Actually, I had a question about. I mean, it's kind of related, kind of not. It's more for my own curiosity. But do you think that these groups, the Sabbateans, the Frankists, and the Donme, do you think that what they practice plays a part in what's kind of keeping the Middle East and Semitic lands kind of in the Dark Ages?
It may contribute to it. I'm not really certain if promiscuity or that things that kind of go in that orgiastic ritual and stuff like that. I don't know if that contributes to their sort of barbarism and some weaknesses, but I would say that probably an unexplored avenue is that when somebody has many different sexual partners, they are also spreading parasites to each different sexual partner that they have, and this kind of shows up in all the kind of degenerative and mental illnesses that you see in those people. And also, it has to do with how many birth defects you see in those populations as well. And also, there's not the same kind of prohibition on incest with some of those groups. So I'd just like to kind of mention that as some areas to explore. But yeah, I think your question was good, and we can see this kind of reflected in the culture, because these types of people are trying to steer us and steer our culture to more closely emulate theirs.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you see a lot of these same things kind of reflected in parts of the U.S. and I'm sure in Europe too. European listeners, feel free to send us your anecdotes. I would love to see them, to kind of get a feel of how this is spread. But in the U.S., you take a place like Chicago or Baltimore, or hell, let's go with L.A. I mean, what better example do you have than L.A. For this kind of rampant degeneracy and what it's doing to not only the people but the entire culture. You see, this idea of open love, being spread, and now we're at that point to where there are legitimate advocates for okaying pedophilia. So, that's kind of why I was asking, because we're starting to see these things being reflected in modern, Zio-globalist culture that leftists like to embrace.
Well, absolutely, and I think anyone who digs into their religion and their culture will find out that they do not have prohibitions on pedophilia or incest, and I think that is kind of a contributing factor to the wickedness of their personality. But I think that is that is a big part of why they're trying to make us suffer, is because anyone who engages in that sort of activity, that is really vastly different from the European practice, where if these things were ever done, it was definitely to be kind of kept in the dark. Is kind of not. It was not a mainstream practice. Unfortunately, it did happen with Europeans, but it was not ritualized. It was not accepted, and both. For the past few hundred years, people in Europe and America have really been progressing in trying to protect children and protect women from that kind of barbarism. Yes, it still happens, but it's not something that we want to persist. It's not something that we want to even allow. So yeah, I think that, it's like I said before, I think a good measure of the quality of a culture is how much it protects the weakest, and that would be the children, and and also women. So anyway, beyond that, there, this term cult actually has become to be used more like a pejorative. But in the past, it was just synonymous with any kind of religion, actually. For example, you had the Roman imperial cult, and that's what it was referred to in the history, and that was the predecessor to the Catholic Church. So I just wanted to mention that I'm certainly not using this term cult as a pejorative. I'm talking about it in an analytical way. I'm talking about all the different types that people refer to, but I don't see it that way, and I don't see even a cult as a lesser of anything, even though that might be how perhaps Christians refer to cults, as like a bad alternative. So another type of fertility cult that I think is really important to mention is the gynocentric sects of pagan groups. Much like the modern West, they were oriented around female needs, desires, and whims. The word fertility, infertility cult, is actually a euphemism for gynocentrism, in that it's not necessarily connected with the actual like life fertility and bringing about children. So I wanted to mention that it's kind of a trick. Sometimes people use this so that they don't have to actually say like it was female dominated. However, most of what they're doing will be centered around female needs, and that is in contrast to the patriarchal society. So they're in certain places, in certain times, they're going to have the development of more patriarchal or more matriarchal societies, and one of the euphemisms they use would be that fertility cult. So is there anything you wanted to add to that? Do you also have an understanding of the gynocentric groups?
Well, I can only speak from my own experience here and what I've perceived. And the first thing that came to mind when you mentioned fertility cult as a euphemism for gynocentrism was and again, I'm not trying to bash on Wiccans here. I'm just saying it as I've relived it or perceived it. But I think of I think it's the Dianic cult of Wicca, which is a very gynocentric, and ironically, they were all but gutted out by the same LGBT, Q, alpha, omega, XYZ, gamma, delta, whatever, that they kind of help push to legitimize themselves to begin with. But you mentioned kind of the black and white dualistic of either it's a uh, gynocentric or androcentric thing that happens. And I think this is where a lot of people get confused, especially when it comes to paganism. And as a more recent example, the folk right. They'll accuse the folk right, of which I'm a proponent, by the way, in case somebody didn't know at this point. They've accused it of being gynocentric when really it espouses a balance between the masculine and feminine based on the roles that need to be fulfilled in order for a healthy family and tribe to be raised. So it's not the same as like Dianics who are all about just predominantly worshiping their goddess side of their dualistic deity. There, it's not all about placing only female gods first and foremost. It's about having that balance between the two. So it's kind of an interesting thing that the dualistic aspect that you mentioned, Tony, is kind of manifesting itself and uh, being applied to things that obviously, if you really look at it, are not gynocentric or androcentric in terms of the focus of spiritual practice. Um, that's apart from social structure and hierarchy and whatnot, which again is it's for another show potentially, or maybe if somebody wants to send us an email, hint hint hint, and ask us. But that's what I've got for that. Now, I'm curious about you've talked about these festivals and these different kinds of cults. And earlier, you kind of alluded to rites that you came across, and I'm kind of interested in what you discovered there. I mean, I know what I know about things, but I'm kind of curious to see what you've discovered and if there's something new there for me to learn.
Uh, well, there might be, and I hope so, and I just like to kind of caution people. It might start out kind of like a black pill, but I want to kind of talk about where we're at and where we're probably going to start turning things on this. And the subject of fertility rights was and it always has been a critical part of any culture. And in some in some cultures there are more or less ritual around sex, so it can really vary. But for example, in the modern time, the ritual is often consuming alcohol or passive consumption of entertainments, sometimes followed by sex after that. And it's not very dignified if you explain it that way, but I would say a lot of people kind of fall into that category. Especially, I've met many people in my life, and that would kind of be the general pattern that they go through on their rituals. And the ritual goes on for some time, often not really culminating in any birth, but sometimes abortion and miscarriage, because it's not very well known. They don't educate women on this, but if a woman's body has a lot of toxicity, be it from any of these factors, be it drugs, alcohol, pharmaceuticals, or also a lack of the nutrition that we discussed before, her body will have too much toxicity to be able to bring a birth to term. And so it's something that I really wanted to mention, that this whole thing isn't just about women and them giving birth, but it's also about their mental health. Because if you can imagine a woman who doesn't have the knowledge about this fertility, and she goes into trying to have a child, whether it be intentionally or haphazardly, it could be very detrimental to her mental health to have these multiple failures. And I've seen a lot of women agonize over this, and they didn't know that you really have to be in good shape. You have to have good nutrition around this. So anyway, I would say even the nutrition should be part of the ritual going forward. We could bring that back in some clever way. But in the past, there were times when people celebrated their children, kind of like I mentioned before. The idea of having like the king and queen, or like the lord and mistress of the spring, that people in certain times and places, people have celebrated their children. We have seen kind of a revival in this on the right, and also in philosophical groups, that the reemergence of celebrating the child, especially in a time when many people are not fertile of mind and body and spirit. So I think it's good to kind of mark these events of the conception and birth, and give special significance to it, rather than kind of like the dominant culture in the West now is just to do it kind of haphazardly and without thought, and just to kind of instinctually go about life without really considering the future. So anyway, another thing that from the mainstream history in ancient Greece was Demeter, the goddess of fertility, and the rites at that time were associated with the seasons, as we would imagine, and it was a way to kind of appreciate and recognize our connection with nature, the fruits that start to they come from the flowers, and we harvest the fruits. And then other plants would have something we could use. But they were celebrating the grape for obvious reasons. Another one I just wanted to kind of mention in passing is the Islamic State has its own type of rite called the sacralized rape, and that's pretty obvious. We've been hearing a lot about that in the alt media, that the mainstream media would more prefer not to cover it, unless they just kind of get their arm twisted and it becomes so obvious and blatant. But yeah, it's very obvious. It's barbarous, and we don't have to go into too much about that unless you wanted to say something about the Islamic State.
Oh, I have nothing to say about the Islamic State that hasn't been said by others already. I mean, they're a worthless
Okay.
piece of shit organization as far as I'm concerned. But in terms of the ritualized
Hmm.
rape, for anybody who can stomach it, you know, I got inspiration for this from what you just said about how the mainstream media won't cover it unless their arm is twisted. I say let's twist their damn arm about it. Let's twist their arms. Let's like force
Hmm.
this practice into the spotlight. Let's say, hey, this is what's going on. Again, only if you have the stomach to do the research on it yourself and meme spam about it and flood social media with it. Like, let's bring this to people's attention. That's that's what I have to say
Hmm.
about that. Just force the
Hmm.
issue.
Yeah, we're not represented by the mainstream party, so we have to do it. And actually, I did want to add something to this, and I've not hidden this in our shows, but if people like us are able to rise in rank in our culture to the point where we become part of the leadership, these types of people who are raping white women and even children, sadly, I have no qualms about putting them in their place when the time comes and making sure that for one, they're expelled from our lands, but two, they are properly put in their place so that they understand where what their role is. And I'm sure you guys can understand why I'd want to do something like that. But anyway, just in moving on, I did hear that there is a connection between fertility rights and the psychoanalytic movement that happened. Um, it's kind of an ongoing thing from the 19th to the 20th century. But for the naysayers, no, it's not entirely a Jewish thing, as many would probably say. That there are many white men and women, brilliant people as well, who studied and contributed to that discipline, and it was very much centered around empathy and nature, and really trying to understand. Sexuality was a component of it, and fertility, but they were really looking at it in an intellectual way. They wanted to discover in greater and greater detail about the psyche surrounding sexuality, and to see if that could give us some clues about our human origins or our European origins. And the psychoanalytic movement was a very big part of the European ethno-religious and nationalist revival in the 19th century and sometimes in the 20th century as well. So I just wanted to kind of mention that, maybe I'm kind of a dissenting view on the right about the usefulness of psychoanalysis, but it is not entirely dominated by Jews. There are some things we can glean about human nature from that. And yeah, these fertility rights, I am very curious to see where this goes in the future. Like the first thing I mentioned, the kind of vapidity of consuming entertainments and stuff like that, I would like to see that replaced with something better, with something more interesting, with something more fertile and more focused on life. And yeah, do you have any ideas on what would be a more healthy courting ritual for men and women? What would you like to see? You're a father, and I would like to be a father one day. What would you like to see for your kids and our kids as a community when it comes to celebrating life, dating, and these kind of fertility rites and rituals? What would you like to see?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is something that I remember um, Varg mentioning in one of his podcasts a while back about ancient, pagan rituals and whatnot involving the community. And I got reminded of it when you mentioned, um, kind of a little boy and a little girl being picked as, the quote unquote, king and queen of spring or whatever else. And he mentioned that that very thing used to be done. The men would have you know trials and tests of courage and strength and whatnot to become the king of that season, and they would pick uh, the most beautiful, accomplished woman of the tribe to kind of be the king and queen, so to speak, of that year, and they would do it again next year. I would really like to see a return of that kind of thing because I think that would help lend itself to one, mending male and female relations. It would help reinforce communities, and I honestly don't see a downside to something like that. Our people need it very 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 badly, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, we're kind of running out the clock here. This has been a good solid episode, I would have to say. So, is there any last minute comments you wanted to make before we go ahead and wrap this up, Tony?
No, thanks. I appreciate what you said, and I would like to hear more from the audience. What do you think we could do to kind of steer the culture in a healthier direction that is considerate to the people living and future generations? What is going to help us in this regard for our, mental, physical, and spiritual fertility? I'd like to hear back and have some correspondence with the audience on this. And we'll try to roll this into future episodes, whatever new things we discover. So yeah, thanks a lot, Grimvera, for going through a lot of this important stuff. I thought it was really fascinating, and I hope the audience also found it interesting to
Yeah,
hear.
so do I. Anyway, that's it for this one. We'll go ahead and link the wonderful sources that we mentioned on the page that this podcast appears on, and in the uh, info on YouTube there and other places we post this. So this is Grim Vera and Tony Crow with Madot Media, and we will see you all later.
Yep. Thanks. Bye bye.